Hello everyone. So yes, I'm going to run through an introduction to this co-design discussion that we're having, and indeed the concept of what is a co-design and why are we doing it. Run through some of the key areas we've been looking at so far in which the discussion is centered around, and give you all a chance to input to that. As Martin was saying, you can use the chat box or put your hand up to take the mic. We are not particularly saying hold your peace and now do questions at a certain point, so do feel free to chip in whenever you want. And my colleague Ruth will be monitoring the chat box and bringing things to my attention if we need to stop and discuss anything. So that's, as I mentioned, that's the structure for today's webinar. You can see my photo anyway in Collaborate, but I've opted not to use video because I'm just doing it on wireless. I'm not sure how well that's going to work. But that on the left there, on the image is Ruth, and the right is me. I'm Head of Higher Education and Student Experience for JISC, and I have a role in the R&D work that JISC does, leading on the student experience area of that. And this topic that we're talking about today, about the use of data to improve teaching and learning, is something we've been looking at for a while, and we think is really coming up as a big challenge and area of interest to the sector. So I'm very excited to have this opportunity to talk to you about it today, talk with you about it today. So JISC's R&D work has been, for the last few years, focused around this idea of co-design, which really means that we take input from the stakeholders in our community about which things are pressing issues for them, areas that they think might be useful for JISC to explore, to look at whether there's a service or an opportunity there that we can do something on behalf of the sector. The last time we did this at scale was 2014. The three big ideas that came out of that were for a research data shared service, digital capability, and learning analytics, and those are now the three big projects that are going through our R&D pipeline, which is what you can see on the screen at the moment. Earlier this year, we had a consultation on visions, sort of longer-term visions. We were looking at 2020 and 2030 visions for both teaching and research in higher education and for further education and skills. And the alt community gave us lots of comments on those, which we worked into a revised version of the visions, which are now published. So those stand as the kind of longer-term guide for our work. And what we're doing now is taking soundings again from the sector on, okay, well, that's what we still see as a broad direction of travel, but within that, what are the key issues that we could work on to help meet challenges for our community? And that's what we're doing this year's co-design, how we're doing this year's co-design process. So that the community isn't starting from a blank sheet on this one, we, as I said, based on those visions and from what we're hearing from people, shaped some challenges to give people kind of hooks to hang comments off and to share ideas with. All six are listed on this slide here. We've got intelligent campus, next generation learning environments, which is an interesting one, and I imagine of real interest to the alt community as well. Digital skills for research, the digital apprentice, next generation research environment, and indeed whether that should be separate from next generation learning environment, and then the topic of today's session, which is around the use of data to improve teaching and learning. You'll note perhaps that I skipped over that term data driven, which is the one captured in the graphic, because one of the first issues that really came up on this, as I'll go into in a minute, is concern around the phrase data-driven, implying too little looking at other sources of information and too much priority for purely data. So the process of going from discussing these 6 challenges to having projects that are pursuing those to see whether we can develop offerings out of them is given on this slide that we're on now, slide 8. Oh, it's showing us slide 8 of 19 on mine. I've just seen that Ruth put slide 5 in, but on the numbering on the slide, I think says slide 5. So at the moment we're in that phase of discussing emerging challenges. We've put the deadline then on as 25th of November, but in fact we're always open even after that to hear any reflections or suggestions that you might have. Out of that, we will work to identify ideas, and then we'll come back in January for a phase of prioritization of those ideas with the community, seeing which ones individuals and institutions are interested in and will want to work with. Then in February we'll announce the successful ideas, and from then on really report progress for whether it does seem like there's actionable things in that area and how those projects are shaping up. So that's the overall process, and this webinar today is part of that first blob of the process, discuss those emerging challenges. So, a summary of what we're looking at here in this area of the use of data to improve teaching and learning. Andy McGregor, one of my colleagues, summarized this on his blog post as these are like monsters on the on ancient maps, that they're both intriguing and alluring, but also potentially dangerous. And if we can sort of, they serve to broadly group the sort of areas that we could pursue under this broad heading of the use of data. Just to say before I go through them is that we're taking as read really the work that's already going on in DISC around the use of learning analytics in to support learners as they go through their studies. And this is what we're talking about today, is more potentially other applications of that data to improve teaching and learning rather than to intervene to improve the chance of the success of individual learners. So the areas we're looking at are data-informed course improvements. So course teams looking at various sorts of data to make improvements either in year or year on year to the way that they teach their courses, where a course could be a module or a group of courses or a whole program. The next area is, can we carry out research based on big data amassed in the Learning Records Warehouse from Learning Analytics? Obviously that would require all the permissions being secured and ethical approval, but potentially that is quite an interesting data set for educational research. Is there something perhaps more straightforward, less big data-y we can use around collating evidence on what works, so that anyone designing or refining courses has pointers really, can look for evidence about how they might be able to make gains in that to improve the performance of that course, to make it easier for learners, make it, easy is probably not the right word, but more effective in teaching learners, in getting them to think and getting them to engage with the concepts in a productive way. What can we do with data around designing for maximum employability? If we look at destinations data and analyze that against perhaps key components of what's happening in our course, and then also look at that in the context of predicted global or local or national skills gaps. Is there a recipe there for designing for maximum employability? But like I said, these are all scary monsters. That there are reasons why you wouldn't do that, even if you do think it's possible. And lastly, can we use various technologies to monitor student reactions, either in online or face-to-face environments, for real-time improvements in what we do to help us gain feedback without having to ask specifically for feedback that would help us shape our teaching in the moment or from one session to the next. So I'll just say a bit about what the sort of consistent reaction is, and then run through in a bit more detail each of those challenges, and really invite. I can see that people are already putting comments in, which is great. So, as you might expect, the first reaction is really a collective cry of don't forget all the other important things that need to be understood alongside data in order to make decisions. So it's not about everything being wholly data driven. It's making data-informed decisions, drawing on other sources, understanding the narrative, understanding how this fits with the broader student experience, making sure you use qualitative measures as well, and not over-relying on data, or using the existence of a data-driven argument as an excuse almost, as an overriding thing, not to explore other aspects of provision or of the support that students might need, or other arguments for the way things should be. So yeah, evidence informed is a good term for what we're looking at, and I think particularly one of those 5 monsters is very clearly that sort of evidence informed flavour. So I'll just pause for a moment and have a look at that question from Patrick. So far, seems existing data, not trying to generate new sources to answer questions about my course. I think a lot of the data is probably out there. It may not be regarded as an existing source though. And I think if we did look at the analytics one, the learning records warehouses would be a new source of data. But I'd be interested to hear more about the sort of thing you're thinking about there. Right, Patrick, would you like to speak? I think you might have a problem with your audio, because I can see that you've got your mic on, but I'm not hearing anything.
Yes, I have a mute button as well, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's fine.
Excellent. What I was thinking about was changing the learning design to be able to generate more information about what's actually happening, instead of just relying on what we already have. So the kind of traces of data that we have are an incomplete picture. Some of those things you're saying about understanding in the round, we can generate more data. For me, some of the benefits about the data use is the speed of being able to process that, and the consistency of that. But yeah, so what I was asking about was much more about instead of just taking what we have, thinking about what we need and being able to look at that more closely.
Thanks very much. No, I agree, and I think that stuff about richer data from more explicit learning design, so we actually know more about what's happening, is one of the really exciting things that's come up about this area actually. Right now I've got way too much going on in the chat box for me to. Ruth, is there anything I need to pick up on just now? Okay. Well, maybe some of that will come. If the stuff about theory, we might come back to on the evidence base. Actually, you still got your mic open. Okay. So the first monster, data-informed course improvements. So here we're thinking about, I think it's easiest to imagine in the context of a course team or an individual if they're the only person responsible for a given module. Looking at a broad set of data sources to understand how, as far as they can, how that course is working out for students, where there's areas that are really working, where there might be things that aren't working as well as they could be. So we're looking at the kind of activity data from VLE accesses, library use, e-resources, from attendance and presence in various places, looking at results from assessment, and even if formative assessment results are captured, that will be fine to look at here because you're not using them in a summative sense. Any surveys, any comments, and that's what I mean about triangulated with the course team's feeling about how things have gone, about which aspects are working well and which working less well. To then make adjustments, improvements, both year on year in terms of planning how that could work differently for next year, but also within a given presentation of a course or module to address areas of misconception or reteach something that doesn't seem to have gone so well, that kind of thing. I put costs at the bottom because I was talking about this area with the Pro Vice Chancellor last week, and he was saying that they do take a very hard look at the costs of all of their courses, and that he thinks that is a key element of what you need to consider when you're thinking about how a course is taught. And so that would need to be a factor into the mix when you think about, particularly if you're thinking about significant changes into the way the overall course is structured. Does it make it more or less affordable, and is it still within the window which enables your university or college to put on that course? I'll just pause for a moment there and see if anyone wants to raise anything in particular. I'm trying not to be distracted by the chat box flying past me. Anyone wants to put their hand up and say anything?
They're still talking about theory v data sources.
Okay, I'll look forward to picking up on that discussion on theory versus data sources later. Okay, so the second monster is research based on analytics, big data, and I see that Neil Slater has joined at the perfect moment. So the data sources for that is the Learning Records Warehouse, which is being developed through the GIST Learning Analytics work. And I should emphasize here that this is not something that's going to happen by default. This would only ever happen as a research data source with appropriate permissions secured from the universities involved, who had in turn put appropriate collection agreements and permissions with their student body. So, but potentially that is a very rich source of data that could be mined for insights, particularly when combined with other quantitative measures. Again, still a little way off, but there's interest in could that be combined with learning gain measures to look at what kind of behavioural patterns are associated with higher learning gains. All sorts of more obvious things around like destination data, the actual outcomes in terms of the degree or grade point average, compared to actual behavioural patterns, I think is very interesting, and provides a different tool for looking at differential outcomes, the causes of differential outcomes in different groups of students. If it's pointed out that it's not background characteristics that might be influencing that so much as that, but how they're expressed in behavioural tendencies. So that database would let you look across historic data, look at a number of different programs, and potentially develop new insights, or indeed confirm what we already know about what works in teaching and learning in a digital environment, because it does need to be in a digital environment to some extent to leave the kind of traces that would show up in the records warehouse. I'll just leave some space for anyone to comment on that in the chat box or with the mic.
Chris has asked about, does it include FE? So I said yes. So I don't know if you'd like to comment on FE.
Okay, so Chris, you're asking about, would this include FE? It would include FE as FE comes onto the learning analytics activity, really. And that's in a relatively earlier stage than HE at the moment, but certainly potentially it would be included. The overall challenge certainly does include FE. Although at the moment there's some different drivers obviously happening in FE from HE, and indeed slightly different among the nations as well. Obviously with the HE in England, with the TAF and Scotland, although the indications are that they will join in with that, they don't actually have to. So I'll move on to the next one. Collating evidence on what works. I just realised I need a bit of a sexier title for that. So this is pulling together the evidence from all the various places it may be about what works, particularly in in a digital environment, technology, enhanced learning, or just learning and teaching in a digital environment. So the data sources are evaluations of implementations, probably that the universities and colleges have done themselves, specific research studies, that may be carried out by some of the means that we've just discussed. Actually, may come from both course teams doing correlations to see which features of course design seem to be producing the best results. Again, as Patrick was saying, that would require some new capture for most institutions around the sort of pedagogic purpose of a lot of the activities in the courses. It could be specific studies to test a hypothesis about technology enhanced learning. I think crucially it should be not just research findings, but some sort of recipes for implementation, so that people who want to put this into practice have some idea how you do that, how people got those results, what they did see improvements from, and ultimately you'd want to get a feeling from, if you did this thing over, or if you could only afford to do one of two things, or it only made sense for your course design to do one of two things, which would be more likely to give the biggest benefit to you and your learners. And so this should enable the kind of aggregation of marginal gains approach that's been so successful in sport to look at, okay, which things can I combine that will be beneficial. And certainly I was talking to somebody about this the other day who's both senior in learning and teaching and comes from a sports science background. He actually thought that the biggest, if you're going to go the marginal gains way, it is by re-emphasising the importance of the basics in course design and indeed in presentation, and all the stuff that kind of about constructive alignment between assessment and learning objectives, being really clear about what the assessment criteria are, making sure that you get all your notes in the right place so that students can look at them before your session if they want to, so that they have them to go back to. But that it would be interesting to test that hypothesis. Designing for maximum employability. This is really, all this data is out there, and because this one probably wouldn't rely on the aggregation of analytics data. You could do it on a single university basis or college basis, combined with destination data and the economic data of where the skills gaps are likely to emerge over the next few years. It would be possible to take quite a data-informed approach to course design for employability. Which in some ways you think, well, that seems sensible, but that's not the only purpose of particularly higher education. And does it risk reducing it all down to this one measure and have people gaming that measure, whereas in fact higher education and further education have a broader role in society than to provide a workforce? But that's the question around that one, I think. Combined with is it indeed possible to do that in this way? Would you get the sort of results you'd hope for? I'm just pausing to have a look at the chat box. There's nothing particular I need to pick up on there, I don't think. Oh. So yes, I was just looking at Dan's comment there about, yes, I think interesting to, I think it does. I think the pure data scientists might argue that actually you might not need to capture pedagogical teaching methods, and you can look at how it plays out in terms of just activity. My gut feeling stroke professional bias is that I think you would need to capture something around the pedagogical teaching methods to make sense for a lot of this. So in terms of monitoring reactions for real-time improvements, this is just a kind of scienced-up version of being in the room with your students and watching them for cues about what they do and don't understand and for how they're feeling. So clickers and other response systems are one way of doing this. Monitoring students' emerging understanding and reactions to what you're doing. There's other ways, you can imagine other ways of doing it in an online classroom. But there are technologies coming on stream now which recognize human reactions to give a different kind of flag about where students are becoming angry, becoming bored, becoming restless, and that combines with a smart classroom technology which can do things like monitor fidgeting, monitoring pulse rates and everything. And other things like the learnometer, which just monitors the environmental conditions that I'm just looking at. We've had some very challenging environmental conditions here in Bristol today with no heating, and it's almost completely dark outside the room as well, which is obviously to kind of send your body into not the best receptive mode for learning. And looking at if you monitor how the environment is faring, you have better information about how likely it is that students are in the right kind of mental space and physical place for learning. But I think obviously particularly the human reaction recognition is pretty alarming, let's say, to a lot of people, even though it's what we as humans do, most of us do a lot of the time. So that was the last of my monsters. So I think now's probably a good time for to capture any further points that anyone wants to make about any of those or reflections.
Do you want to talk about outcome measurement?
I can see there's a discussion there around outcome measures. Joe, did you want to say anything more about what you were asking and saying there around what we use as outcome measures? Sorry, that's me. looking through the chat box and looking at all the comments. Joe says he's coming on in a minute. So Joe, put your hand up or something when you're ready. Okay, I just noticed Dan's point there about a lot of this is focusing on staff as the audience, but there's lots of mileage in presenting appropriate information to the learner from the same data set. I think that's true, and that is certainly something that we're looking at in learning analytics as to what is an appropriate set of data that can be presented to learners, because generally you don't want to present to them you don't want to present something with risk flags or their undigested data on it, but there will be, for most learners, there will be a data set that they do find actionable and motivating. But no, I was looking at the sort of evidence-based and marginal gain stuff the other day, and I came to the conclusion that actually a way of doing that would be to put it in the hands of the learner to kind of keep them on track with. They've probably been told a lot about all the behaviours that will lead to greater learning gain, if you like, and it's helping them keep a track on which strategies they are actually employing and how they're doing on that. I think would be beneficial. I've got everything squeezed up onto a tiny screen, so whoever it is that put your hand up,
it's me, it's Joe Wilson.
Please
can you hear me now?
Speak. I can hear you, Joe.
Okay, just a very quick bit, and it's about, I can talk about how colleges are measured in Scotland, and it's not that different really how colleges are measured in England either. And a lot of it is about outcome measures. So and one of that is about progression measures. And bluntly, they have to provide statistics on where their learners are going, whether they're progressing on into employment or whether they're progressing on into higher education. And that data is there. And in Scotland, a lot of the push just now is around what's called closing the attainment gap, because we've got a lot of learners that come in from the lower socioeconomic groups and postcodes, and some colleges are actually very good at progressing and raising the attainment of these groups, and some colleges still aren't very good at it. So that's the big target in Scotland just now, and really any data around online learning or anything, it's easier if you go with how colleges are being judged, and then everybody will see the relevance of this. I'll shut up at that.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, I think both of those challenges still exist in higher education as well. Really, exactly as stated, the challenge of getting best attainment and then employment/education outcomes for students from diverse backgrounds. And I think yes, the use of data to track how those differentials can be reduced and get the best outcomes for everybody, and the best both outcomes, both in terms of your result of your education and what you're able to do with it next, I think is really important. Yeah, I noticed in the chat that Lena has said about tracking, the almost the official stuff that learners do, and their self-study work, and some of which indeed will be offline. And I think that is interesting. And also, certainly on Graham Gibbs' analysis, it's that purposeful self-study that is really key, and that was the key purpose almost of contact hours, was to generate purposeful self-study in the rest of the time. And John's just highlighting there the wanted to capture detailed student assessment interaction. I think that this information, up to date, as near to real time as possible, information about student assessment is really, really key still in learning analytics, and both for the predictive modelling, and it will be for any kind of research as well. It is one of the key areas, almost one of the things you would think of as a real basic, and still quite difficult because of the sort of mix of systems that are used, and it is not just systems, processes. Okay, there's nobody else feels like taking the mic. I will move on to the poll, although you are still free to use the text chat and indeed take the mic if you wish. So, based on what we've been discussing, which of these do you think has the most potential? And you'll use the poll button there. I think it will show you just under your own name under the participant box. Or just under my name. Yeah, and it's showing a lowercase typeface A at the moment. I can see people are voting, brilliant. I'll just give you a few more moments to finish making your selections. Right, there's the results. Ruth's just moving those so we can see them. So, with the data-informed course improvements in the lead, it's closely followed by collating evidence on what works, and 30 people haven't responded, and a few narrative verdicts. Okay, and Lena making a plea for just getting on with it and start getting successful recipes. It would be a good starting point. Yep, I agree, and that is something I'm looking at actually. Dan, do you want to say any more about what further education is already doing under that A heading? Yes, I can see Dan saying that there are a raft of kind of metrics used to judge quality of a course in FE, and indeed the way in which a university uses data to help quality enhance and quality assure is something that's gaining increasing importance in HE as well, I think. Megan's just reminding us of the importance of staff voice, and it does often get forgotten.
Mikey's on the call as well.
Yeah, Marika. Okay, thanks very much. Then I'll just move on to our second poll. I think I cleared the data out of that one. Which of these do you think has the most danger? Which one do we need to stay away from? Okay. So that the one that comes out as most dangerous is designing for maximum employability. I didn't pick, because the comments are whizzing past me, I didn't pick up that many comments on that when we were talking about it, so I'd be really interested in comments from people. I don't think I'm going to let you get off this call without explaining a bit of that reaction. What is it that's so dangerous about that? And is it the same in FE as it is in HE? As in, is it something to do with the nature of HE that people believe that HE is about much more than employability, and is that the same or different for FE? So Rosie's asking, what does maximum employability even mean? Sorry, it's my shorthand for designing a course so that you are aiming for the statistically your students to have the best chance of gaining employment or good employment following that course. And that is down to both the types of activities you do on the course, the area of the discipline or professional area of the course, and the kind of attributes you seek to engender in your students through the course. And Isabel's pointing out that there's also a kind of practical question about focusing on employability, in that the goalposts are always moving. And I've certainly known people who've got really, I'm trying to think of a polite way to say it, have been left in a difficult position by signing up for a course that was intended to meet a demand that never transpired, particularly in teaching. So there is, and that was by universities chasing what they thought was going to be a gap in the market. So I think there are ethical issues there. That the more you claim to be focused on employability, the more careful you have to be.
So picking up on critical thinking, and then worry about task.
Yes, I'm just looking at the comments, some other comments here with Ruth, that employability is important to students, but we have to continue to facilitate critical thinking and challenge. Although, if you ask employers, I think they'd say that was a key aspect of employability. That is a key aspect of what employers are looking for. And concerns about the danger of chasing the metrics, gaming the system. I think we see that with the TAF. Whatever ends up those things that are the metrics in the TAF becomes the metrics that are most important to seek to change, rather than necessarily seeking to change the overall to improve the overall learning and teaching experience. Interestingly, with the changes in the NSS questions coming up, Ipsos Mori, who run the NSS, were predicting that they thought overall satisfaction scores would dip a bit on the new question set. So yeah, further discussion around the importance of thinking skills and the dangers of jumping to redefine what courses because of what employers say they need. And Patrick's suggesting that D is about students achieving their goals. That's that's kind of close to what I think about that one actually. Is that we need to be as give students the best guidance we can, that we're able to them to achieve their goals, accepting that those goals may not include a focus on employability. And Marika's picked up that employability data has the most potential for manipulation and gaming, and indeed continually moving goalposts. So that's really interesting. I didn't necessarily expect that one to come back as the most dangerous. It's also, I think, one of the closer ones to being a reality right now as well, which is interesting. Yeah, and Megan highlighting the importance of skills and attributes and behaviours for your overall career management, not just your current job or indeed your next target job. Okay, we've just got a few minutes left, so is there any other points that anyone wants to make about anything that we've discussed today? Okay, I'll just move on then to our final slide. So this being Collaborate, I don't think any of those links actually work from you. I think Ruth put them in at the start of the chat. Do you want to stick, have you got them somewhere you can stick them in again? Yeah. So Ruth will just pop those in the chat. There is a form, a Google form, with some sort of question prompts around this area. So if you did want to contribute some more, even a sentence or two in some of those boxes would be really useful for us. So Lena, yes, I will let you know once you've got an option to submit successful recipes.
Has Neil Slater got anything to say about learners?
Sorry, I can't. My screen's so tiny I can't see who's got their hand up, but if you've got your hand up and if you're number one, would you like to speak now?
Doesn't appear as there to be anyone with their hand up right now.
Okay, thanks everyone.
Well, thank you, Sarah and Ruth. I think it's very clear from the participation in this webinar and some of the discussions that have been going on in chat that it's an area that you know, people really want to engage with. So I would encourage people to continue the discussion with the co-design 16 hashtag in the Google form. And I think this is something as well that certainly given the last two alt annual surveys is an area that the membership is particularly keen in doing more with and doing more better. So I think it's something that we're going to keep seeing coming up in the community. I'll also make a blatant plug for the Alt Online Winter Conference, which is going to be in the first week of December. It's free for people to attend, and I'm sure there'll be further discussions around how data can be used in learning and teaching. But if we could thank both Sarah and Ruth for their presentation today. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody, and I will enjoy perusing the contents of the chat window in a little bit more at my leisure later on, because there was a lot going on. I couldn't keep track of it all as well as think and speak at the same time. But that's been really great. Thank you ever so much for your engagement.